It's Song Talk Radio.
Welcome to Song Talk Radio, the show with songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and together we all become better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me, my co-host, Phil Emery. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing okay. I'm a little discombobulated, to be honest with you, but it's been a very discombobulating last few days.
Discombobulation is good as long as you recognize the source of the discombobulation and you realize that you can decombobulate the discombobulation.
I'm not sure. I have a little story to tell you, but we'll do it after the intro.
Okay, do it after. Sounds good. And everyone else, please send in your comments and questions and your discombobulations to @SongTalkRadio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, feedback@songtalk.ca for the email, and we'll share your thoughts on the show. And please visit songtalk.ca to see the show post for this episode, to find links to resources we mention, and to download lyric and chord sheets to follow along with the songs that we feature. And before we get to today's special guest, just a couple of updated tips and things. Something I've been playing around with, I mentioned on the podcast a few weeks ago, I think just after the holidays, that discovered this new virtual singing software. Dreamtonic is the company, and they make this thing called Synthesizer V, which has various sound banks. And as much as, we've talked about, every time we talk about home recording and things like that, we always say, you don't have to buy every plugin in the world, but albeit I've been throwing, a good amount of cash at this company now to get their sound banks. I got the English singing male vocalist as well as the English speaking female vocalist, and it's turning into a really cool tool just to play around with things, and it's actually a heck of a lot easier, even from a songwriting point of view, because you're just playing around with notes, and if you want to change a lyric, you don't have to set up another microphone again and re-record a vocal or get someone else in the room to redo that melody or redo that thing. You can play around, you can try things, and you can change lyrics, and you can see how it sings better. And it's kind of an interesting exercise in that regard, because I found that what I'm doing right now is I'm actually revisiting a song that I wrote like 10 years ago, and I jettisoned the original chorus because I never liked it, and I rewrote the chorus the other day, and even as I was tweaking around with this vocal settings and stuff like that in this plugin, I was like, well, maybe this lyric will work a little bit better.
That's awesome.
So you just continue tweaking, and I guess, that's the danger of home studio work, is that you can just keep on going on and on and on forever.
Yeah, that is
At a certain point, you just
true.
gotta, decide that you're done. But still, it's turning into an interesting exercise and a fun new tool to work with.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm discombobulated is, it's on a personal note. Everyone, I mentioned that we had found a kitten in a cemetery a few months back in November,
right.
And turned out this took her to the vet, and she was a little female and really wonderful little kitten. We called her Sadie, and she was having lots of fun playing with her brothers. We took her into us to get spayed. They gave her a blood test 2 days before, so we brought her in to get spayed, and the vet came out and said, "Oh, by the way, Sadie's a boy."
Oh no!
And even though she's been to multiple vets, actually 2 different vet practices, and probably about four or five vet visits, because Sadie had actually hurt her leg. Turns out she's a boy. Her testicles just dropped, and
oh no!
So it's been very odd. Suddenly, you had this little girl kitten, and now it's a little boy kitten named Charlie.
Boy.
So,
oh, you changed her name to Charlie?
Yeah, well, it seemed kind of weird. So maybe we were
call him Sadie. Yeah,
maybe we were calling him Sadie, and he's going around going, "Who the hell's this Sadie person? There's only 3 cats."
Oh, boy.
So yeah,
to pick an androgynous name.
Yeah, that's what we're trying. Very crazy.
Gee whiz. Okay, that would be discombobulating for Sadie, least of all, or for Charlie now. Yeah.
But on the music front,
yes,
quite a while ago, we did a special show on songwriting software, and there was various rhyme generators and rhyme librarians on the internet, and we reviewed a company called program called Rhyme Genie by Adolamic Software, and it was quite good. And it came with a free software where you could keep track of your lyrics and all the various bits of information of your songs called Tunesmith. As a free add-on. It was good, but it was not cheap. It was about I think $79.99 US at the time. It is now $24.95 US.
Nice.
And Rhyme Genie, and we'll have the URL in the show notes. I use it a lot. Actually, I use it a lot for copywriting. Because when you're trying to find, often you'll use a thesaurus to find different words, and thesauruses can be very stiff, and Rhyme Genie is very suggestive by its process. So actually for copywriting, it's been really good. So anyways, that's Rhyme Genie, now down to $24.95. I've picked up my copy, and if it's well worth it to it's well worth a look. There is a demo version available.
Cool. And just to be clear, when you say copywriting, you're not talking about copyright as in legal copyright. You're talking about writing.
Yeah, writing because I do a lot. I write copy for ads.
Yeah, writing, the writing of copy.
Yeah, and in the capital C, I suppose, or maybe look. I don't know what it is. Anyways, it's one of the C's, and either way, it's really useful for that. Surprisingly useful. So definitely go in for that. One issue though, the free version of it comes with this program called Tunesmith, which is great. You can put in your lyrics. You can put in, when you've written it, if you've submitted it anywhere, it lets you track all that stuff. Is really good. Something I found out, unfortunately, though, is it's very hard to get that information out of Tunesmith. So if you ever want to export it into a CSV file or something else, it doesn't work terribly well. So that's one of the bad things about Tunesmith. But if you don't mind using that one program, it's pretty handy.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, and I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And and you've had an interesting article about physicists unraveling a mystery about jazz that you sent me.
Yes. So
what's that all about?
We got this from the Bobby Owinski website. He also has a really good podcast about the music industry. Not really about songwriting. It's sort of more of a general thing, but definitely one of the old hands of the music industry. And what these Professor Theo Gesell, who is a retired physicist who's piled his trade at the highly regarded Max Planck Institute in Germany, where he spent decades studying the physics of synchronization, as opposed to the physics of speaking, like how the billions of neurons in your brain coordinate with each other. He's also a sax player, and he plays in a band with other physicists, and decided to take on the task of finding out precisely what swing is. And what they did is, I think they looked at 450 recordings of jazz soloists, including performances by Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, and others. And he found out that almost all of them were using tiny delays of the downbeat compared to the rhythm section. So in other words, wherever the one was for the rhythm section, the soloist would be behind as much as 30 milliseconds by hitting those notes. What was surprising in these delays weren't random, but consistent based on the player's feel. Of course, when you're working on MIDI sequences and you're doing drums, you usually will delay the the snare between like 10 to 15 milliseconds. It'll kind of put it in the pocket a bit more. And, you want to do the same thing with a bass drum to kind of give it a bit of to define that pocket. But what these sax players did, to get that wonderful sort of swing was to sort of pull back slightly. And 30 milliseconds is a long time in music, to pull back that first beat and to play slightly behind the beat. So when you're out there and doing your solos or doing that kind of thing, try to actually be a little bit slaggy behind the beat and see how that works out for you. I think that could be a kind of an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating that they went to that level of detail, and that is an important distinction because, like, in a world these days, especially in pop music and stuff like that, everything is quantized to death, and
Yes.
everything's quantized to the grid, very straight, no swing. That's a broad generalization, but
Yeah, that's true.
tends to be the thing, right? And I say for myself, even when I'm recording, MIDI based things off my keyboard, I do tend to quantize quite a bit when it comes to the rhythm section. So bass, drums, piano, guitar will get like rhythm guitar will get uh, fairly heavily quantized, but solos and vocals and things like that, like anything that's a melody on top of it,
Yeah.
I tend to not quantize at all, or if anything, it's just nudging a thing here or there. And sometimes, yeah, it's a little bit behind the beat, and sometimes a little bit ahead of the beat, and it sounds natural.
Yes.
And that's the interesting thing about this so-called, like I've noticed in some quantizing functions and things like that, they have like a random button, and it's like random is not the same as humanistic or humanized.
No.
Right, because like you say, like if Dizzy Gillespie was consistently behind the beat, then for this particular song, then it just felt right, and it just kind of, it like you say, puts it in that pocket, puts it in that groove. But there is a consistency to it, and that's the humanized part of it. But if you were to randomize that, it's probably not going to sound quite as human. However, and this is illuminated through what I was just talking about that vocal plugin. A lot of that vocal plugin that I'm using, the Virtual Singer, is AI driven, and artificial intelligence is getting there. Like it's really, really getting there to the point where it could introduce quote unquote humanized functions that are actually more humanized as opposed to random.
Yes.
So it's going to be an interesting thing to see if some of this offbeat kind of thing actually permeates into popular music in some way.
Yeah, no, it's good, definitely. But try being behind a beat a bit more. It'll definitely kind of make things a bit groovier for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you've got one little bit of songwriter news.
Yes, I guess we're getting to the time where a lot of the stars of the 60s and 70s will start passing away. And of course, the very great Burt Bacharach has passed away. And of course, wrote tons of hit songs. This Guy's in Love with You, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Just tons of them. And yeah, very sad to see him pass on. But I guess such is the world of getting old.
Yeah, American songbook legend, eh?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the last great people of that stature. I mean, there's other people who are certainly great songwriters, but I don't think quite sat at that level yet. So very sad. So our condolences go to his family and friends, and basically the songwriting community.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Phil. And moving on to the main event now. Tonight, we're very happy to welcome Billy Lunn, principal songwriter of the UK-based rock band The Subways. And here's a taste of their song, All Right. Billy Lunn is the singer, guitarist, songwriter, and producer of the UK-based rock band The Subways. The Subways released their debut album, Young for Eternity, in 2005, and they just released their fifth album, Uncertain Joys, on January 13th, 2023. Billy grew up on a swirling mix of Motown, rock, disco, dance, hip-hop, and pop, which he gently weaves into the band's own alternative rock sound. He writes and produces other artists' work, as well as The Subways, in the studio he's established in his hometown in the country of Hertfordshire. 2023 and 2024 are both shaping up to be exciting prospects as the Subways look to tour uncertain joys the world over, writing the next album in the process. Welcome to Song Talk Radio, Billy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on the show. I think the most interesting thing about the little intro you gave us is writing your next album in the process. So you, like, while you're touring, you're writing the next album. I feel like that was the thing that bands did, a generation ago or so. I don't know. Do bands still do that, or is that a special thing for you guys?
Well, we're kind of frowned upon for doing that, especially in the UK community. I mean, I remember we did this television show. It was over a decade ago, but we were discussing writing our third album whilst we were touring our second album. And this singer-songwriter turned to us and went, "Are you crazy? That's a stupid idea." But for us, being on the road and, being on the tour bus, being with the community that we've created with our crew, we love being in the band together. Going to new cities, new countries, new continents, meeting new people, being in venues and having these amazing experiences every night. It's just kind of, it's very fertile with, potential subjects to write about. But also you come across so many amazing artists on that journey. We like to book support bands local to the regions in which we're playing, so we get to learn a little bit about the culture of the county or maybe the state of where we are, and that is all kind of subsumed into the songwriting process, and then hopefully we sort of come up with something quite interesting. But yeah, we still do that. It's hard work. Touring's hard work, as you can probably hear in my voice. I'm unbelievably tired. It's now 4 days since we played our last show on our first UK tour of 2023. And I think it has something to do with the pandemic and not playing all that often over the last couple of years, but also a little bit to do with my age now. I'm not 25, So when I'm diving off the stage or diving off speaker stacks or balconies and screaming my guts out every night, it takes just that little bit longer to get, to recuperate. So, we like to use our sound checks as means and ways of testing out new pieces of material. I mean, when we were writing our second record, we were still touring in the US with Tom DeLonge's not Blink-182, Angels and Airwaves, and Taking Back Sunday and Head Automatica. And I think we were playing in Long Beach. We'd spent most of the tour coming up with 3 or 4 songs, and we played soundcheck in Long Beach. And we tested out what ended up being the first single off our second record, All or Nothing, and this song called Girls and Boys. And as we're about halfway through the song, it playing its finished version, we were really happy with it. All the bands just filed out into the arena and were just like, "This is great. What's this? This isn't in the set." And we're like, "This is a new song. Thank you so much." So, and then we tested it that night, and then, you get a sense of where the song's working, where it isn't working. And we're a very live band. Our lifestyle is very much hitting the road. That's our, our primary aspect of being in this band is kind of the carnivalesque, the sanctioned chaos of the live gig environment. So if and when we have to go into the studio to record what we have, we kind of reluctantly shuffle in and do our best, which is why I ended up, producing a lot of our stuff, because I felt a lot more comfortable being in control after the songwriting process is finished. I'm a bit of a control freak like that. But yeah, we still write whilst we're on the road, and but that hasn't happened for a really long time now, because we haven't released an album since 2015. So it's been 8 years since we last released a record. So we're very keen, and we've got a new drummer as well, so we're very keen to get writing with Camille.
It's interesting. There's been this real style now of everyone wanting to write in the studio. That you don't go into the studio with songs. You just go into the studio and you play. You use the studio to write songs. Everyone wants to do that, and that was I guess it was revolutionary in some certain ways, a certain time. I know Roxy Music, that's, the Avalon album, that was completely done in the studio. Whereas, writing songs while on tour was the way that most classic bands did it, because you're there, you're all together, you might as well, work on new stuff. And I think you do get a different product out of it,
Yeah, very much so. And I remember there's a Leicester-based UK alternative band called Kasabian, and their first record, when they released it with BMG, was written in the studio. And I remember them telling me that that's the process of them, writing their debut record. That was so alien to me because, we'd spent years playing venues, mostly across London, but several across, various parts of the UK. And that's how we refined our sound. That's kind of how we found who we are and, how we play our instruments. And how we speak down the microphone, and eventually how we sing down the microphone, and how we relate to each other on stage, which is kind of a reflection of how we relate to each other in the rehearsal space and then off stage. And, that's kind of how we developed our personalities. We started the band when we were very young, 14, 15, and we've stayed the same members ever since, apart from, my brother, our ex-drummer, Josh. He left after our fourth record because he was very keen to start his own songwriting journey. He's a very creative person. So when Kasabian said, the label just sent us into the studio with this producer and we just came up with the songs, that was mind blowing to me. It kind of gave me a little bit of an anxiety attack, because I find the recording studio sometimes quite a claustrophobic space. I think that might have something to do with the fact that when I was growing up, I was moving all over the place with my family. My mum always said she had gypsy blood in her. So, we were moving from house to house. And that's kind of why I think I'm so at home with being on tour. I'm so used to kind of, the wheels rolling and turning up in a new place and making new friends.
I think it's important to recognize for you and for the other band as well. Like what works for you is not necessarily going to be the thing that works for the other band, and vice versa. So, it's good to be able to recognize that and not just go with well, they're successful, so we're going to do what they did. Well, you got to find your own path. But okay. But speaking about control, then, so you are the primary songwriter. How much collaboration is there within the band, or do you sort of bring your songs to the band and they get arranged, or how does that work?
Well, when I was younger, say 17, 18, 19, when I was writing the first record, I was very much, I think it had a lot to do with my personal insecurities and anxieties, in that, I wrote the songs, I brought them to rehearsals. Therefore, I have like the final say, maybe in drum patterns that Josh would come up with, bass lines that Charlotte would come up with. And the thing with both of those two is they're not like classically, well, Charlotte was classically trained in piano, flute, clarinet, saxophone, but the bass guitar was the first thing, the first instrument she picked up, and she was like, I don't know anything about this instrument. I'm just going to feel my way through this. So if I take a song
99% of bass players.
It's a feeling thing, isn't it?
It is.
It's kind of the same with drums. I think once you start playing the drums, and I've heard some drummers say that there comes a time when a switch is flicked in your brain and you just get the rhythm. Mm-hmm. Like you are just locked in, and it doesn't matter how many patterns how many paradiddles you practice, you've got it, because something in your brain has acclimatized, and you kind of normative function now is playing the drums. So when I'd take ideas to Charlotte and Josh, I'd be like very prescriptive. And there would be some arguments about too much deviation away from the original idea that I had in my head. And I think because I took on the responsibility of recording all our demos that we sent out to the promoters at London venues. So, I felt like I was shouldering a lot of the burden. Therefore, I maybe get more of a final decision, a final cut decision on how the song sounds. So, very controlling until we got to record our first record with Ian Brodie in Elevator Studios in Liverpool. And it was my first experience of kind of opening the door to collaboration, because all of a sudden someone else was at the console, someone else was making the aesthetic decisions, and I was just there to perform the parts that I'd written. And maybe make some constructive, creative decisions towards mixing ideas, but very loosely, because obviously I'm working with someone who's been producing, songwriting, and mixing for decades. So it's definitely someone I should be listening to. And after that, I think I became a lot more liberal-minded about how the songs were constructed. That also had something to do with the kind of bands that we were touring with and listening to their records, realizing that the recording process doesn't have to be such an overwhelming prospect. I had a real anxiety about the final recorded version of the song being epitomic of that song, it being the everlasting version of that song. And I came to realize it doesn't have to be seen or envisioned in that way. It can just be another version of the song, a shadow of the song, an afterlife of the song. And I get to reclaim that song again and again each night we play it live on stage. I get to make a sort of reclamation of that. And once I came to terms with that, I became much more at ease with the idea of getting the song down on tape and that being a version of the song. And I think when it came to building the song as an ensemble piece with Charlotte and with Josh, the doors were open then to go, okay, Josh, see what you can make of this. Or, okay, Charlotte, see what you can make of this, which is why, our musicianship, there's a yawning chasm between the first record and the second record, because I'm kind of allowing their uniqueness to shine through. And there's something really to be said about trusting your bandmates, not just as musicians and performers, but as artists. Allow them to be artists. And from that day forth, I was very much like, okay, so the idea that I come up with in my bedroom or my living room or my kitchen or when I'm walking down the street, that's great. That's interesting. But it's only really a great piece of work, or the best work it can possibly be, when I'm in collaboration with these two fantastic other artists that make up the Subways. And I think that ended up kind of affecting my personality as well. I became a much calmer person to be around. For sure. I had a lot of barriers up, and we started off very young. We were touring the UK and eventually, touring the world at a very young age. And as kind of a protective measure, I set up a lot of barriers around myself, and I was very hands-on. And as I got older and older, obviously, I think you become a bit more relaxed about everything as you get older. But I think when you come into contact with people, like we came into contact with Butch Vig, the superstar legendary producer, they teach you implicitly so many incredible memories and lessons. And you can't help but disarm yourself and kind of grow as a person, which in turn only fuels the fire of the creative process, because I think the more air and the more heat and more light you get, the more inspired you become. There was no way I was gonna continue to write albums with those barriers up, with me shielding myself in from all these things that were happening around me. Actually, what I needed to do was to be more at ease with everything that was happening around me, and allow that to, function as part of the songwriting process, even if it doesn't contribute explicitly or directly in some fashion. It feeds into the quotidian experience of what it is to be a songwriter, even when songs aren't being written at the time.
What is that process? What is your songwriting process? Are you a words first person, music first person, riff first person?
Very much I'm a music first person. For me, there has to be a chord sequence. I have to have that anchor there, and everything blooms from that. Preferably, I'll send some idea, a chord sequence or a chain of chord sequences with a melody over the top played on guitar or piano, Charlotte and now Camille, who's our new drummer. And then I let that be what it is, you know. I like to have some sort of loose structure. I very much have a kind of like an abstract template or an apprehension of a template that I carry around with me in my head that doesn't have to be the way that the song ends up, but it's a very handy tool to have to know where you envisage the song going eventually. You kind of know how.
You have any kind of idea like what the song is about? Like if you read a particular chord sequence and you go, this is kind of a happy thing and it should be a happy lyric, or
do you just find words? Do you just like go that and find a word that sort of fits and then work, which is what I certainly do.
Yeah, phonetics are incredibly important. I don't think enough attention is paid to the effects or the integral nature of phonetics in lyrics. I mean, their origins are in poetry and to some extent, like the more poetic forms of prose, which themselves are meant usually to be read aloud. So consonants, internal rhyme, line end rhyme, different kinds of meter, syllabic, inflection, and all that kind of stuff. They play a lot of part of poetics, and I think I'm very much drawn to the Renaissance poetry of Petrarch, and a lot of the poetry of the Tudor court and maybe some 18th century poetry. So it's very much formulaic in that it has a rhyme and a meter. So if I'm to write lyrics, then I like to have that structure built there for me. I love working to constraints. So, if I all of a sudden have some sense of meaning welling up in me that needs funneling, I'll find a constraint. So I'll either say, okay, I'm going to write this in a Petrarchan sonnet, which is 14 lines and 2 quatrains and a sestet, or a Shakespearean, or maybe just like 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. And that way, when I'm working to those constraints, I'm crowbarring techniques in that lend themselves towards the poetic practice. So when it comes to songwriting, I like to have the chords and definitely like the shape of the melody, the rhythm of the melody can change. Sometimes I have to throw entire lyric sections out because Charlotte has come up with a fantastic rhythm on the bass guitar, and I'm like, I have to follow it. I have to mirror that because it's just so wildly good. And that's another thing that I probably never would have done before we, worked on our first record. But yeah, a lot of the time.
Do you ever find that like I found this in the past for myself, that when I write melodies and then I try to jam lyrics to fit the melodies, stuff has to inevitably change, and sometimes it has to change a lot. And sometimes your melodies go because depending on the pronunciation, the cadences and things like that, like it you get emphasis on the wrong syllables, kind of thing ends up happening, or it doesn't quite line up. I mean, do you ever find that where it has to be a lot of back and forth, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. I think change and alteration and backtracking are incredibly important modes of function in the songwriting process. I think if you, in the same way that like life and experience and learning is never really linear, it's kind of a whirlwind. Sometimes you find yourself in the same place that you were 5 months ago, but you're a different person then, because you've had 5 months of experience and now you can adequately deal with that place that you find yourself in again. So alterations are a welcome part, of the mechanics.
So you do a lot of editing of the work?
Yeah. I used to jot everything down handwritten, and the thing is that so many alterations would come up that it would just end up being this page or several pages of scribblings out, and it was indecipherable. So in the digital age, I'm so thankful now that we have things like Dropbox, or, you know, that I have Pro Tools on the go with me, and I can always just spark something up and get working. Because the alterations, you know, you have a backlog of everything that you once had, but at the same time, you know, so you can look back or you can recall them if you want, but at the same time, you're also working with a plain sheet of paper all the time.
Yeah,
so
cool.
so you can just refresh if you need, and then take what you've already established, or you can you know, just start messing things and tangling things up and see it, and then you start pulling things away again, and then all of a sudden the core idea of the song is there, and everything just seems to fall in place.
What are those tools that you're using? Are you just using
those digital tools?
Like, are you just using like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, or?
Yeah, so Microsoft Word, and you know, voice memo. The voice memo application on my iPhone is unbelievably helpful. Now that I used to meticulously notate, like, okay, so I come in with this first bit of the melody on the and of the bar, and all these kind of things that were very bespoke to my process, but at the same time, kind of, you know, unnecessarily roundabout. Now I can just, okay, here's the guitar, here's the melody. And, you know, you can number them as you go. So here's the first take of this try, and then I listen back, and here's the second take. And you can just go through and go, actually, I prefer the first one to the rest because I got to the nub of the issue better. But more than anything, I love to have the chorus very much there. If I know I've got a great chorus, I can move forwards then with the song, knowing that the toughest aspect of the songwriting process for me anyway is done and dusted, and I can just enjoy the rest.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the process behind the song "All Right," where did it come from? And I mean, your chorus is one word, so you know you have it there, and it's got a great melody, so that's all you need, right?
Yeah, I actually came up with the idea of All Right when we were still recording our first record, Young Fraternity. And I remember demoing it with the assistant engineer because our main producer, Ian Brodie, had gone home for a few days. We were still in Liverpool. We told John Gray, fantastic producer now, you know, can we just still, because we had this SSL desk console that we at our disposal, all the fantastic microphones and pre's and all that sort of stuff, all the outboard equipment that you get in a studio like Elevator Studios. And he was like, yeah, let's see what you come up with. And I've still got the original demo of it, and it's blaming terrible. You know, the lyrics to the verse are so hackneyed and trite. But I think, you know, how we were talking about phonetics earlier, I really was just trying to work syllabically with this melody that I was adamant was going to be the melody, and it stayed that way all the way through. More than anything, I think the song "All Right" is really just about breaking out of the studio, you know, because by that point we'd finished tracking Young Fraternity, and I found it an incredibly wrenching experience because, like I say earlier, I'm a bit of a control freak, and having Ian in control of the recording process, I just wanted to be back on stage again. You know, I wanted to get out of the rooms. I wanted to get out of the stuffy, oppressive nature of the studio. And I know, you know, you get some really aesthetically beautiful studios that are not in the slightest sterile environments. They're actually very creative environments. But because of all the expectations that the record label had of us and our manager, and to some extent our families, because, you know, it was all very exciting. We'd been signed to Warner Records, and we were going to make a record in the studio, and we're going to go out on tour. I just wanted to be back on the stage again, where I felt most comfortable. And I think from that yearning, pining that I had during the recording process came this very free sounding, very open, almost Californian song. on our second record, we actually have a song called California, just about dreaming about going to California. I just had these dreams because I, grew up in suburbia. My job at the time of writing Young for Eternity was working as a linen porter in a hotel. So I would collect the dirty sheets in the hotel rooms and package them up and send them off. It was all incredibly glamorous. But it gave me loads of time to think of ideas for songwriting. I listened to my favorite records, and I didn't have to interact with too many people. And I'd go home every day from that job, pick up my guitar, and the ideas would just spill out of me. So by the time we got round to, signing with Warner's and getting in the studio, I was so eager to get out on the road. And All Right was just about that tension, that conflict of doing the thing that I've always wanted to do, which is being a rock band, writing songs for a living, recording songs for a living, and touring songs for a living. But at the same time, finding myself in a stasis of being in an environment that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. But, looking back, I was a young kid. I don't think there was any environment I was entirely comfortable with.
Yeah. And what's actually really great about the song too is that you've written it in such a way, like you don't explicitly talk about recording studios or about that particular experience, but you've written in such a way that that's open to anyone who's, overcoming some kind of a difficulty in life in general, whatever, and everything is going to be all right, kind of thing, right? So it's a very universal message that this is what we always talk about, with lyric writing. You start with something really intensely specific and personal, but if you generalize it to a certain extent, then it becomes much more open to the listener's story as well, right?
It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And I think that's the beauty of it, really, is that, and it's kind of the same with various mediums in the arts culture, is that there is so much that is handed over to the audience for interpretation, and they can claim that piece of artwork for themselves. And I think what happened was, during that first record, I was kind of freaked out by the idea that eventually these songs that I'd had for such a long time that I knew to be mine were going to be someone else's. So many people's, depending on how many people would actually go out and buy the record, obviously, and how successful the record was. But, people would listen to it, they'd associate it with their own lives, and the songs were no longer mine. And I'd got so used to those songs being mine. And the songs are very specific, Oh Yeah was written about a very specific friendly relationship I had with a girl living on my street. Mary was a song I wrote for my mum after getting home from work and seeing her sat in front of the telly looking really, really sad one day. And I think when I wrote All Right, I really wanted to experiment with how wide I could open that window towards interpretation on the part of the audience, and how much agency that gave me, and toying with how much agency it gave the listener. I think I'm endlessly compelled by reception theory. The idea that every time someone listens to a song, because of who they are, because of how different everyone is in this world, if it's the same song, the interpretation is always going to be, to some extent, wildly different.
Can be,
because of the environments. Obviously, depending on the subject of the song.
It probably should be as well.
I think absolutely, yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that it's such a liberating experience to hear something that in that very moment, though it intentionally is not about you, suddenly becomes about you. And that is a new connection forged between two people who've never met each other before. And that's such a beautiful premise, isn't it?
It really is.
And we're so lucky to be able to partake in that.
Absolutely.
So, when people come up to me and say, like what happened recently, actually, a very, very sad situation. A gent sent a message to me on Instagram saying that in May last year, his daughter died of cancer, and he made a collage of videos of her and pictures of her with our song "Rock and Roll Queen" playing over the top, because they used to play that song in the kitchen every morning and dance together. And he came to one of our shows on our most recent tour in Manchester at this wonderful new venue called Gorilla. Anyway, he turned up with his wife and with a bunch of friends, and I after the show, I made a beeline for him. I was like, I'm going to have to meet you in person. I have to talk to you, and I just had to thank him for letting me be some small part of Grace's life, and part of his life, I felt so unworthy in that moment to be able to include myself as part of their, even just a minuscule aspect of their narrative. But that's what songwriting can do. That's how we can affect people. And, we shouldn't take it lightly, but we should still enjoy it,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take a full listen to the song All Right by the Subways, and then we'll talk a little bit about it after. Hey, that was All Right by the Subways.
My kind of song, 2 minutes and 51 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you do it?
I grew up on Motown music, so I like anything under 3 minutes, 30 seconds. That's me.
I really love it in the instrumentation when the bass line is more melodic than the guitar part.
Yeah. That's something that, I never would have allowed on that first record. But, Charlotte was really finding herself when she went through the process of recording that first record. And I think, as I stated earlier, it was important to me as a songwriter and for my own personal well-being and my own songwriting journey to step back and allow Charlotte to explore that part of herself. And she was really into, well, she still is really into Death Cab for Cutie. And you know, she likes her bass walks. And I like to accommodate that as much as possible, whilst also reminding her that, you know, I do love pop songs. They're what I grew up on, and that's kind of like, you know, that's how I want to communicate to our audience through the medium of pop.
How about you, Phil? What would you like about the song?
Well, it's interesting. So it's a short song. It's really 2 verses, a pre-chorus and a chorus. And 3 distinct parts. Arrangement, I thought it was really interesting because you had those backing vocals that coming in on the first verse, and everyone. I've had this discussion with a guitarist for my old band. Is okay. You have a hook. When do you bring the hook in? Do you bring it into the second verse so that there's a movement within the song, or do you bring it in right at the top? And that's very much of a hook, but it was right in at the start. And I was actually surprised when I heard that, because it seemed like it was like a second or a third verse. But was there a conscious decision on that, or just because it was hooky? Or
yeah, well, Charlotte came up with it. I loved it, and Butch, the producer, was. I loved it. I loved it every time he said it, but he was saying, don't bore us, get to the chorus. And I think that when it came not just to, you know, the choruses, but other phrases, and especially with something like a middle 8, you know, I like to keep middle 8s nice and concise and then roll on from there, whether it's into a solo or a new version of the chorus. And it just, I think as soon as I heard Charlotte do that, I was like, straight off, you know, come right in. And a lot of the songs on the first record and some on the second involve dual vocals between me and Charlotte, offering you know, different opinions, which whilst in some respects can restrict the interpretation of the song, kind of diversifies and colors the intentional narrative of the song from on the songwriter's perspective. So you know, when Charlotte had a line, I was like, just put it right in there, and you know, straight up.
Well, it also works really well because every section is super short. Like your verse comes in and out, and then you get into your pre-chorus, and then your like it's all very short and concise as it is. So to do the OOs is right off the bat, I think it totally works. The thing I really like about this, and again, this is the weird thing about us doing this on the podcast. And if you're listening to the podcast, if you're looking at the lyric sheet, which we will post up on the website on songtalk.ca, if you're looking at the lyric sheet, there's a verse, there's a pre-chorus, you're calling it B verse, and then the chorus. But there's a very tight relationship between the pre-chorus and the chorus, because the all right rhymes with the first line of the pre-chorus. Right. So it's very, it is almost like one section. It's almost like a verse refrain kind of structure. If you don't label things on the lyric sheet, then it's open to interpretation what you're going to call it.
I would push back on that, because I think the rhythmic change that goes into the pre-chorus really does differentiate it from the verse.
Oh, no, absolutely. But I'm talking about the relationship between the pre-chorus and the chorus.
Right. Yeah.
That's a very tight relationship. And so we see the light, all right. And then the second time around, the reasons why, all right. Like it just seems tighter in that sense. And it also helps that your chorus is dead simple. It's all right. Same melody every single time. Yeah. And, you know, if it, in the sense that it doesn't stand alone by itself. It's not just the word all right without any context. It's another chance and it will be all right.
Yeah,
like that's actually the complete thought, even though structurally, melodically, it's a little bit detached from that. That is the thought. So it totally works.
Now, I've never actually thought of it in that way before, consequentially. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I came up with the chorus, all right. I knew I was going to say all right, because I just wanted everything to be all right. I wanted to feel all right. I wanted to feel comfortable. And I also kind of, you know, I I think in those pre-choruses, I'm talking to the listener. I'm saying it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
But and so I wrote the what I call the B verse leading up to that as a reason for saying all right. But I've never actually thought of it. The word all right really is just a hangover from the pre-chorus, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways it is.
Yeah.
And you just thought about it maybe in the opposite direction than it occurs in the song, which is perfectly fine. I mean, a lot of people start with their chorus and then work backwards, right?
Yeah.
Or start with the bridge and work backwards, or whatever the case may be. But
Yeah.
the point is they're connected, whether which chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
But
it's just amazing that it's never really occurred to me that they're so they're so the chorus is so dependent on the pre-chorus until you just mentioned it, having played it for 18 years now.
And then that just goes back to you talking about earlier about the interpretation of a listener being how they see it can be largely different than how you conceived it.
Yeah,
it can be equally valid, and it changes your view on it, perhaps.
Yeah, you learn about your own song. Sorry, go ahead.
So I've got a big macro question, and it's something I've always wondered about. So when I was really, really young, punk hit. So I kind of came into my teenage years. Basically, all my friends looked to the UK. And rock music has really been based out of the US or the UK, and they're both kind of looking at each other and bouncing ideas. So I grew up with, the Smiths and Blur and Oasis and, and Depeche Mode. And basically everyone who was cool was from the UK, to the point where Toronto bands were singing with fake British accents because that was the people who we thought were cool. And of course, when you're young, that's what you do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because this doesn't sound terribly UK-ish.
No.
Except it does on the pre-chorus.
Right.
There is that has that sort of UK kind of lilt to it. And it's a very subtle difference in approach to melody and song construction, which is different from a US basis. I mean, I love the Ramones as well. But it sort of switches into something that's very kind of UK-ish in the pre-chorus, and then the chorus is very sort of US. Like it sounds like very much like a US band. Now is this?
Yeah.
Now I do a lot of British music because I love Johnny Marr and I love the Smiths and I love Morrissey's lyrics. I don't love Morrissey.
No, of course I'm with you there. Yeah.
Yeah, because nobody does anymore. How did that man become such an asshat?
Oh my Lord, I know.
And I know he's gay, and I know this is a bit generalization, but I expect more from gay people. You'd think
that a member of a marginalized community would feel for other marginalized communities rather than wish to oppress them. It's a weird contradiction that seems to be happening a lot at the moment. Yeah,
that's true. But so is this? Now, is that
back to the music.
Because you look so. You've grown up in Motown, which is, of course, my love of mine. That is your stuff more sort of U.S. kind of focused, or is it just who you are?
I'm very aware of the perennial game of tennis of artistic tennis that the UK and the US have played across the Atlantic. Probably since the 1950s, and you can hear it in a lot of Bowie's records. The American influence is seeping in, and then you can hear the influence of Bowie in American records. So I have, whilst I grew up during a time of like real. There was just kind of an explosion of British music in the 90s and early noughties. I was mocked, I think, for my love of Americana and American music. Nirvana were the first band that were my band.
He's a great songwriter.
Oh, Kurt Cobain.
So good.
My hero in so many respects. You look back and you just think so ahead of his time, so compassionate, so empathetic, and so bold. I think at the time, people thought of him as kind of a whiner and a complainer, but actually these were legitimate issues and problems within and without the music industry and at society at large that he was confronting and holding a mirror up to. But songwriting wise, I think the Nirvana template very much appealed to me, and so did, like, you listen to All Right, and though it doesn't really sound all that much like Nirvana, the melody, it does have a kind of Bleach-esque up and down, swing to it. That actually is probably more pop than Cobain would ever have gone for. But yeah, I've never really been all that ashamed of how much I love American music. I remember when we went over for our first American tour, and I heard Fall Out Boy on the taxi stereo, and I turned to Charlotte in the cab and I just went, we have to make a record here. We need to make a record that sounds as huge and I could not contemplate making a record that sounded so punchy. It was punching me in the face through those speakers, and that's why we ended up going with Butch Vig to record All or Nothing, and which is the record that All Right is on. So yeah, phrase to phrase, I will find myself sometimes on this side of the Atlantic, sometimes on that side of the Atlantic, shamelessly.
No, it's perfectly legitimate. I mean, why not, right? Yeah, I mean, certainly your English accent slips in there somewhere, but on the whole, it does sound. I mean,
yeah.
At a certain point, who cares? It's a great song.
Oh, we know, yeah, it's a brilliant song, but it's.
I think that sometimes. Some lyrics and some approaches are much easier to sing with a localized accent, and with sometimes adding idioms and dialectics can really help with that process. You listen to the first record by the Arctic Monkeys, and it's so parochially Yorkshire, not even just British. It's so.
Very local,
reflective of a very specific place in Yorkshire, that relies on very explicit references to things that are of that place and experiences that are of that place. And I think some of the melodies, especially on the second record, because the vowels are so elongated, it almost becomes impossible to impose my North London accent on them.
Yeah.
It would be an affectation if I were to say this is me being very British. So and also it comes after years of singing Smokey Robinson and the Supremes and Nirvana and all those artists I grew up on, even Earth, Wind and Fire. So yeah,
right on.
That's great. So what's coming up next for you?
So we are about to hit Europe, touring our fifth album, Uncertain Joys. In the summer, we're going to be doing UK and European festivals. Later in the year, we're going to probably wrap things up a little bit over here, and hopefully go over to America and Canada, and hopefully Australia and Japan. And then we're going to finish up 2024 with some big festivals all over the world. So a lot ahead. It's kind of it's overwhelming, but at the same time really exciting, because after such an extended period of doing almost nothing and having this record in our locker and just wanting so many people to hear it, I just want to get my boots on and get on that stage and just play. And that's
make sure you got Toronto on your list.
Oh, 100%.
All right.
100%.
We'll go to St. John's, but that's okay.
Yeah, you got to go to St. John's
it's a lot like Ireland, so that might make you feel better.
Oh, lovely. Well, I think we're just going to have coffee anyway, aren't we?
Please do.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a cup of tea. Okay, all right.
Cup of tea, that's it.
Yeah. That's about all the time we have on Song Talk Radio. Special thanks to Billy Lunn of the Subways. So what's your, where can our listeners find out more about you and your music?
So website is thesubways.net. You can find us on Facebook /The Subways, Twitter, The Subways, Instagram, The Subways. Nice and easy.
Nice and easy. And we will link to all that stuff from our show post on songtalk.ca. And we want to hear from you, our listeners. So please send your comments on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram to @SongTalkRadio, or send us an email, feedback@songtalk.ca. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel for live performance videos and full episodes. Subscribe today to the Song Talk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider. And you can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mention on the show on our resources page on the website. And wherever you are in the world, please join us online via Zoom at our next monthly Song Talk meetup. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend the meetup. Bring a song and a lyric sheet and get constructive feedback from other songwriters. Stop by songtalk.ca. And the super good news that we just got this week is that we will be resuming live in-person meetups again, finally, after the pandemic at the Transac Club in Toronto. So for our Toronto listeners, look forward to stay tuned on the meetup.com page, and you'll be notified as to when that's going to be happening. Should be quite soon. And you can follow me at neomodi.com. You can follow Phil.
PhilEmery.ca.
And Billy, what's the Subway's favorite social media channel?
Instagram. Yeah, but it's the funnest place. Well, I think our band account follows mostly dog accounts, so animal accounts. It's just so heartening and so lovely. Yes.
Subway's the dog. Okay. Thanks for listening. You guys need a mascot now. Thanks for listening, and be sure to stop by the website songtalk.ca to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest. Thanks for tuning, everyone, and keep on writing.
Good night. I forgot that.